Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family, Logan and Clara. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you are interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, by listener request, let's return to a book we haven't read from in some time, Cottages, or Hints on Economical Building, containing 24 plates of medium and low-cost houses contributed by different New York architects, together with descriptive letterpress giving practical suggestions for cottage building, compiled and edited by A.W. Bruner, architect, to which is added a chapter on the water supply, drainage, sewerage, heating, and ventilation, and other sanitary questions relating to country houses by William Paul Garrard, C.E. First published in 1884 by William T. Comstock, 6 Astor Place, New York. Let's pick up right where we left off at Chapter 8. Let's begin. Chapter 8. The first 4 plates in this book show designs for the simplest kind of cottages. Strict economy has been observed, and the arrangement is as compact as possible, no space being wasted. The first has 2 rooms on a floor, the living room containing the stairs. The roof is unbroken, overhanging enough to cover the bay and merely extending to form the porch. Plates 2, 3, and 4 show a separate hall for the stairs, and closets and pantry are provided. In one case, the upper floor contains 2 large rooms, in the others 4 smaller chambers. Plate 3 shows the kitchen and living room separated by a pantry with 2 doors, and in the next design, communication between these rooms is had through the hall, an arrangement quite suitable for such a small house. Nothing could be plainer or more straightforward than the plans and exterior treatment of these 4 cottages, and the result is interesting in showing that even the simplest house may be planned with some reference to comfort, and a pleasing exterior expression attained without the least ornamentation. Plates 5, 6, and 7 give designs for slightly larger cottages, with 3 rooms on the first floor. The roofs are boldly treated, and in Plate 5 we see the picturesque effect obtained by an exterior chimney. This design also shows an effective treatment of windows in the sitting room, and a broad, low veranda covered by a continuation of the main roof. Designs 6 and 7 are 2 6-room cottages, very compactly planned. the exteriors show clapboards on the first story and shingles above. Plate 8 gives a cottage without a kitchen. There is space for it if desired, which may be built in connection with an hotel. This is becoming a favorite way of living during the summer, the inmates of the cottage taking their meals at the hotel, and thus much of the trouble of housekeeping is avoided. Several of the plans in this book could be used in a similar way, the space for kitchen devoted to other uses or omitted entirely. In this plan, the 2 rooms on the first floor open into each other, making practically one large, airy apartment, which, with the shady veranda in front, is an arrangement well adapted for warm weather. In Plate 9, we have a small 7-room house. The sitting room has a large fireplace, with seats at the side, screened by an arch or transom, and making a pleasant little nook. Plate 10 is a design of a picturesque cottage, which shows in plan a nearly square hall with a fireplace opening into a broad piazza. At a little extra expense, the small bedroom on the second floor could be made wider, or a bathroom added to advantage. The plan of Plate 11 provides an entrance hall or vestibule, which will be of special use if the house is occupied in winter. The side door opens into the end of the main hall, and the arrangement of rooms is well studied. The overhanging gables have a bold effect, and the materials used are the same as in nearly all the preceding designs. Plate 12 gives plans and elevations for a house, the first story of which is to be built of stone, the second of wood. The stone is irregularly laid, the rough surface contrasting well with the shingles above. The plan provides for 6 good-sized rooms with plenty of closets. In Plate 13, we have a house planned so that the 2 main rooms on each floor are exposed on 3 sides, an arrangement which, if the size and shape of the lot permits, is good for a summer residence. The treatment of exterior also indicates this use. Plate 14 gives a design for a 7-room cottage with a wide hall and a bathroom. The kitchen is conveniently placed, both in regard to the dining room and front door. The balcony in the second story adds to the exterior effect by giving more shadow to the front. Plate 15 is a design for a seaside cottage. The hall is so arranged that the stairs are screened, thus making a little vestibule. The dining room and parlor are only divided by an arch, and may be separated by a portiere or thrown into one large room, while the veranda gives the shade so desirable at the seashore. Plate 16 shows a picturesque house broadly treated. The second story overhangs the first, covering the piazza. The rooms are large and of good proportion, and each bedroom has its closet. Bungalows, as the one-story houses used in India are called, seem adapted to some parts of America, particularly as summer cottages. Plate 17 and the frontispiece show a house which will commend itself to those who dislike going up and down stairs. This plan provides a hall, dining room, and kitchen, each with its fireplace and closet, and 3 bedrooms. The door of the bathroom and that of the bedroom opposite are misplaced and should open into the corridor. There is a small stairway to the attic, where there is space for dormitories if desired. The construction of this sort of house is so simple, and the foundation may be so light, that it will cost but a trifle more than if the rooms were arranged in the ordinary way. The bungalow here given is very simply treated, the roof being only broken for the outlook from the attic and extending to cover the veranda. Plate 18 shows a house suitable for an ordinary 50-foot suburban lot. The entrance hall is divided by an arch and bookcases, making an agreeable sitting room or library. The second story contains 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. There are accommodations in the attic for servants. Plate 19 is a design for a cottage on a side hill with the kitchen in the basement. The projection of the stairs in the main hall gives place for a seat opposite the fireplace and may be made a cozy little corner. The dining room, hall, and sitting room open into each other. The last 4 plates are designs for double or semi-detached houses. If instead of building single houses, 2 persons will combine, adopting some arrangement such as these designs show, they will effect a considerable saving of expense. The houses, although receiving light and air only on 3 sides, are bright and comfortable. Privacy is not destroyed, as the entrance porches are separated, and windows placed so as to avoid looking from one house to the other. The exterior treatment in designs 20 and 21 seems to indicate more clearly than the others that they are double houses, while numbers 22 and 23, though not concealing this fact, have more the air of large single houses. This is a nice question of expression, which our readers may decide for themselves. These drawings show different architects' conceptions of what small and medium-sized cottages should be. They differ greatly from each other, both in plan and exterior design, but the general expression seems to be much the same. They are not pretentious, and no ornament exists for its own sake. Chimneys and roofs are boldly and frankly treated, and a certain breadth and hospitality are expressed by nearly all. Only a few of their special features have been mentioned, a fuller description being deemed unnecessary. Chapter 9. It will be noticed in all these designs, at whatever grace or charm they may have, is the result of the simplest treatment. A building should be logically designed, and the exterior be the natural expression of the plan. This is what is meant by truth in architecture. But just how much need be expressed is not always clear. A proper regard for our architectural morals does not require us to exhibit to the passer-by every detail of construction and arrangement. Only what is shown must be true. A building ought at least to declare its purpose, which should be recognizable at a glance, but a house may well express more than the fact that it is a house. It may have a pretentious and showy appearance, or be modest and unassuming. It may look cheerful and hospitable, or cold and forbidding. Now, for a cottage to be pretentious is in bad taste. It need not be so humble as to nestle among the violets, but it can assert itself sufficiently without being decked with tawdry ornaments or the vanity of cupola or towers. On the other hand, it would be equally false for a large mansion, which should have an air of dignity and magnificence, to attempt to assume a simple rustic appearance. Indeed, Southey informs us that the devil's favorite sin is the pride that apes humility. Proportion, that is, the relation of parts to each other and to the whole, is the most important element of beauty in architecture. This has been the subject of much discussion and controversy. The parts of a building having a certain mathematical relation to each other, numerous attempts have been made to formulate this and establish reliable rules for the guidance of the designer. All the theories, however, are conflicting, notwithstanding that most of them are proved by their authors to apply directly to the Parthenon, which Earth proudly wears as the best gem in her zone. It seems that the sense of proportion, like an eye for color or an ear for music, is an innate quality possessed by some and lacked by others, and that it is as impossible to design a building as to make a musical composition by mathematical rules. Beauty alone is not sufficient to constitute architectural excellence. Architecture is the art of building, and utility is the first consideration. If the architect be an artist, endowed with an appreciation of form and color, he will so combine the materials at his command that he will produce a building at once useful and beautiful. Exterior ornament should be sparingly used on cottages, and if at all, should be so employed as to emphasize the design. But it seems more sensible in an economical dwelling to keep the exterior quite simple. While we should not inflict our neighbors with an ugly house, we will not be open to the charge of selfishness if we choose the extravagance of a daintily carved oak mantel in our sitting room to that of ornamented brackets and posts on the veranda. Chapter 10. In these designs for cottages, it will be observed that there has been no attempt made to adhere to any historical style, and this, we believe, shows a greater appreciation of the beauties of architectural styles than if they had been misapplied and tortured into what once was known as rural Gothic or Italian. After defining architecture to be the material expression of the wants, faculties, and the sentiments of the age in which it is created, Owen Jones, in his Grammar of Ornament, said that style in architecture is the peculiar form that expression takes under the influence of climate and the material at hand. Accepting this definition, we see the absurdity of copying buildings erected under totally different conditions from ours. Although an Italian villa is more adaptable to our wants than a Greek temple, and our country houses have often copied both with lamentable results, it does not readily submit to be Americanized. Italy may give us suggestions, and France, England, and Germany offer us many and valuable ones, but in adapting them to our country houses, we must show discrimination, and our own wants and sentiments, if well and naturally expressed, take forms that are not displeasing, even if Corinthian columns and Gothic arches are absent. The question of color is an important one, as an unfortunate selection may spoil the otherwise prettiest house. We have discovered that considerations of cleanliness do not require us to paint our houses white, which, even with the addition of green shutters, is hardly satisfactory. The staring, conspicuous effect of these white houses is what we should avoid, and the tints we choose must be those that will blend harmoniously with the surrounding landscape. The pearly gray that shingles become after exposure to the atmosphere has a very good effect if relieved by contrast with some other color. A good treatment is to give the house a coat of crude petroleum, and if desired, a transparent stain may be mixed with it, which will show the grain of the wood. A range of soft yellows, reds, and browns may be so obtained. Messrs. Rossiter and Wright have published a book entitled Modern House Painting, which gives excellent directions and examples. Chapter 11. If we strive to give to the exterior of our houses a pleasing appearance, how much more reason is there to beautify the interior? It has been claimed that pretty and comfortable homes exert a decided moral influence. Be this as it may, we are all interested in making our homes attractive, and there is no reason why they should not be so. We are apt to think that costly things must be beautiful, but this is by no means true, nor is it true that inexpensive objects must be ugly. The same materials used in the construction and decoration of an ugly apartment might, with the exercise of a little taste, be so employed that a graceful combination result. Low ceilings give an air of comfort, while very high ones have a cold and barren effect, and increase the cost of the house. The ventilation of a room should be quite independent of the height of its ceiling. That is to say, a room with a low ceiling may be well ventilated, and one with a high ceiling may gain nothing by the extra height, but greater facilities for retaining poisonous gases and foul air. Gwilt gives as a rule that the height of the ceiling of a rectangular room should be the same as the width of the room, but since the apartments on a floor are of unequal size, and the ceiling commonly of the same height throughout, no such proportion can be kept, nor is it necessary for a small cottage. From 9 to 10 feet is ample for the first-story rooms. The proportion of a room may be modified by the treatment of its walls. Vertical lines give an appearance of greater height, and horizontal lines make a room look lower. Accordingly, the division of a wall into horizontal bands by means of the dado and frieze, now in such favor, have a tendency to make a room look lower than it really is. This division, however, is a good one. The dado is simply a substitute of a cheaper material for a paneled wainscot of wood. The wooden baseboard and chair rail should be retained, as they serve to protect the wall. A broad frieze is an excellent decorative feature. It should be separated from the wall surface by a picture molding from which the pictures will hang. The excavations at Pompeii have shown many beautiful examples of harmonious wall decoration. The walls are divided by dado and frieze, the dado being generally darker and the frieze lighter than the intermediate surface. We will do well to follow this arrangement, even if we do not adopt the Pompeian colors. If the plaster is finished with a rough surface, a sand finish, it takes color well and makes a satisfactory wall. Within the last few years, wallpapers have been manufactured which are good in design and low in cost. Many of them, printed in 2 tones of the same color, are delicate and make good backgrounds for pictures. Being delicate and quiet does not necessarily mean that the paper must be gray and colorless. It may have a decided color and still harmonize well with the pictures and other objects in the room. Dark red matting used for a dado gives a most satisfactory effect. It may be continuous or divided in panels by narrow strips of wood. Cartridge or ingrain paper is now made in excellent colors and is a good substitute for printed wallpapers. To break the flat surface, a stencil pattern may be traced on it, or this may be done directly on the plaster, which must first be colored. A good ceiling is made of simple felting paper in lieu of plaster, the paper divided into small panels by narrow beaded strips of wood. For door and window trims and other interior woodwork, white pine is recommended, as it is the cheapest and, if properly finished, looks very well. It may be stained if too light. The transparent stains merely darken the wood and do not conceal the natural grain. Under no circumstances try to imitate oak or walnut by graining. Such shams deceive no one and are in the worst taste. If we use paint for interior work, let us use it frankly, carefully selecting the color and avoiding a shiny surface, a flatted or dull finish being preferable. We have a great variety of wood to choose from, if not limited in expense. But hardwoods such as cherry, oak, mahogany, etc., not only are expensive in themselves, but require more labor. Ash is the cheapest of them. If some of the patent fillers are used, an excellent surface may be given to the wood, but these require to be finished with shellac and carefully rubbed down. For cheap work, 2 coats of boiled oil may be used, or if a polished surface is desired, varnish may be substituted. Our fireplaces may be of brick laid in red mortar with wooden shelves, and perhaps lightly framed with wood. Tiles are appropriate for facings and hearth, as they are not affected by the heat. Let our windows be large and extend well up to the ceiling. Have window seats if we can, and dispense with interior doors as much as possible. A curtain of some soft material, it need not be expensive, will look better than a 6-panel door, and it may be pushed to one side while the door is irrepressible. Let us make our hall a bright, cheerful apartment that may aid us to welcome the coming, speed the parting guest. Chapter 12. The cost of building depends so largely upon varying circumstances that it is impossible to give precise estimates without exact information upon such points as the amount of excavation needed, facilities for obtaining stone for foundation, etc. Then the prices of labor and materials vary greatly in different localities, so the figures here given can only be approximately correct. Cottage number 1 could be built as shown on plan for $500. A cellar under it would make it cost about $100 more. Cottages numbers 2, 3, and 4 would cost from $600 to $1,000. Those shown in plates 6, 7, 9, 10, and others of similar character and size may be estimated to cost from $2.50 to $3 per square foot. That is to say, if, as in Figure 9, the extreme exterior dimensions are 21 feet by 29 feet, the house covers 609 square feet and would cost from $1,522 to $1,827. Cottage number 14 could be built for from $3,000 to $3,500. These prices are given as guides and may serve the reader as a standard to follow. If plain interior finish is adopted, these figures may be relied upon for ordinary cases. Some sites, however, present unexpected difficulties, and some localities are peculiarly favored. Then the style of interior finish adopted affects the cost greatly, and the expense may be easily doubled by the use of elaborate cabinet work. A brick house of the same capacity as a wooden one will cost nearly 20% more. Rubble stone, if easily obtained, costs about as much as brick. In building double houses, we may save from 10 to 15% on the cost of the houses singly. Good materials and workmanship are always the cheapest in the end, and it is by no means advisable to economize too closely on that score. There can be no comfort in a house that constantly needs repairs, and the money spent in building a home, carefully and substantially constructed, will never be regretted. Sanitary Questions by William Paul Garrard, C.E. In selecting a site, a loose, porous soil is, for obvious reasons, preferable to ground liable to be damp or wet. Pure, dry sand and gravel make excellent sites for building purposes. Next to these, rocky soils may be chosen and are usually quite healthy. Clay soils, which are more or less impervious to water and therefore always damp and chilly, must not be chosen as a site for dwellings. But above all, avoid made land. Although this refers more particularly to city lots, it is not uncommon, even in the suburbs of large cities, to find low ground filled with garbage, rubbish, and decaying vegetable and animal debris, which are prime causes of impure air in dwellings. Ground which has not before been built upon is undoubtedly preferable to sites of old, torn-down buildings. If the latter must be taken, a detailed and thorough examination should be made with respect to the purity of the soil. Some lots are literally honeycombed with cesspools, privy holes, or have a network of broken drains full of accumulated filth, and the soil is at times found to be contaminated from liquid house refuse or by soakage from barnyards, stables, etc. A well should never be sunk through such formerly occupied ground. It is quite important to ascertain by preliminary borings the level of the groundwater, for a high water level means continuous dampness and must be abated by thorough underdrainage. By underdrainage of a site, we effect a permanent lowering of the groundwater and thus secure to the proposed dwelling dry foundation walls and absence of dampness from the house interior. To remove such subsoil water, small, porous, round tile drains, 1 1/4 inches in diameter, should be laid with open joints at least 2 feet below the level of the cellar floor. The general arrangement of the lines may vary somewhat in each case, but ordinarily the branch drains can be laid in parallel lines, their distance varying from 10 to 25 feet according to the amount of water to be removed. Wherever springs are found, special lines may be required. The trenches should be refilled with broken stones or coarse gravel. All branch pipes should be collected in one main pipe, for which a 2-inch tile pipe will answer in most cases. This main drain should be continued with proper fall to a ditch, ravine, or watercourse. There must never be any connection between such subsoil drains and any foul water drain, sewer, or with a cesspool or sewage tank. If the dwelling stands on a hillside, exposed to subsoil water flowing over an impervious stratum, the foundation walls of the house nearest to the hill are very apt to be wet, often even so much as to have the subsoil water percolate through the cellar walls. In this case, the subterranean water vein should be cut off by a blind drain, that is, a trench dug above the house sufficiently deep and carried with proper fall diagonally across the lot. The trench to be filled with broken stones and to be carried down the hill to some outlet, either an open ditch or a brook. Some attention should be paid to the proper removal of surface water. In the case of suburban cottages, the rain falling upon the roof is almost always collected and stored for use in underground cisterns. Occasionally, a public water supply is available. The cistern is omitted, and the roof water is allowed to run away on the surface and partly soak into the ground, thereby tending to keep the foundation walls damp and unhealthy. To avoid this evil, the ground surrounding the house must be properly graded in order to shed the water off from the walls. At a good distance from the house, the surface water may sometimes be permitted to soak away into the ground, the vegetation helping to absorb a part of it. In other cases, however, surface channels or gutters must be arranged, especially with clay soils. Besides water, the upper layers of the soil always contain ground air, which has a tendency to rise into the dwelling, especially in winter, when our heated dwellings act as huge chimneys, drawing up large quantities of air from the ground beneath them. Such exhalations, which consist in the case of a pure soil of carbonic acid and watery vapor, and which in the case of a contaminated soil are largely mixed with gases of decomposing organic matter, should be rigidly excluded from the interior of houses. For this reason, dwellings without a cellar should never be placed immediately on the ground, but must be raised on piers, arches, or posts, sufficiently to allow of a large airspace and perfect circulation between the surface and the floor beams. This will at the same time prevent the quick rotting of the joists and floorboards. To prevent the rapid cooling of the basement floor, this should be laid double with an intermediate space filled with a non-conducting material. It is more expensive but always preferable to excavate for a cellar and to build the house on strong, well-made foundation walls. The floor of the cellar must be made perfectly tight against groundwater and ground air. There are different ways of doing this. One of the best methods is the following. Cover the surface of the cellar, which has previously been leveled, with a layer of concrete at least 4 inches, better 6 inches deep. Next, put on a thin layer, about 1/4 inch, of hot, pure asphaltum, and on top of this, a finish of Portland cement. The cellar walls must always be made impervious to dampness. As usually built, they are extremely porous, and moisture rises in them by contact with the adjoining ground and by capillary attraction. The best plan to prevent dampness of walls is to have a complete cutoff between the foundation walls and the ground by an open area carried completely round the building and well drained and ventilated. This, however, is expensive, and a similar isolation may be accomplished by building double or hollow walls, the space between inner and outer walls being well aired. The foundation wall should be placed upon a bed of concrete, and must be covered on their outside with a layer of asphaltum, to a point somewhat above the level of the ground. It is very important to provide, at this height in the wall, a horizontal isolating or damp-proof course, which may consist of a thick layer of asphaltum, or of slate bedded in cement, or of layers of tarred roofing paper, or else of hollow tiles. The sill and the floor joists must, of course, be kept above the damp-proof course. The surface water may be kept away from the outer walls by filling the space next to the wall to a depth well below the foundation walls with broken stones or gravel. Sometimes a tile drain is placed below the foot course to carry off any accumulation of percolating storm water. This trench may be covered at the top with a stone slab to shed off surface water. Most so-called practical builders will probably sneer at these suggestions. I can assure those of my readers who care to build a healthy home that the money paid for such preventive measures will be spent for an excellent purpose. The proper construction of healthy foundation walls and of a cellar, dry and cheerful at all times, is the basis of sanitation in cottage building. This much accomplished, all remaining requirements are not so difficult to fulfill. Next to dryness, the most desirable features of a good cellar are that it is well lighted and perfectly ventilated. Good light in a cellar helps much towards its being kept in a proper condition. As regards the necessity of cellar ventilation, remember that your floors will necessarily have some crevices or shrinkage holes, and through these the cellar air will rise and mingle with the atmosphere of your living and sleeping rooms. Above all other things, do not allow your cellar to be made a sort of gigantic poke hole for rags, cast-off clothing, old shoes, tin cans, rotten vegetables, garbage, swill, or other offensive matters. See that it is kept at all times free from rats and vermin. Do not tolerate any opening in the cellar floor for the removal of surplus water into foul water drains. Such opening, even if trapped, will be sure to act at times as an inlet for unwelcome sewer air. The water supply of cottages is derived either from wells, cisterns, or springs. Rarely do we find in the case of scattered houses a public supply delivering water under pressure. A common sight in the country is a well located close to or adjoining a leaching cesspool or a privy. Such wells are usually sunk to but a limited depth, and the liquid sewage from cesspools soaks through the porous subsoil down to the subterranean water stratum. The danger to health from drinking impure water is now universally acknowledged. Polluted well water is rendered more dangerous by the fact that it often has a bright, sparkling, and clear appearance, and has in summertime a low temperature, making it particularly agreeable to drink. Nothing but a chemical analysis or the microscope reveals its unwholesome condition. It is extremely difficult to fix a limit of minimum distance between a well and a cesspool or privy, as so many different factors have to be taken into consideration. In rocky ground especially, there may exist hidden fissures carrying the contents of cesspools a much greater distance than is generally expected. If there is no leaching cesspool, no privy, nor other cause of soil contamination in the neighborhood, a well may safely be used. If cesspools must be kept on or near your or the neighbor's lot, or if the ground has previously been saturated with filth, do not sink a well. A properly built well should have walls made tight and impervious from the level of the groundwater up to the surface, in order to prevent any filtration from the soil surrounding the well. The surface of the ground should be raised somewhat at the well and graded so as to pitch in all directions away from the well. This will prevent the entrance of surface washings. The opening of the well must be thoroughly well covered in order to prevent the falling into the well of vermin and smaller animals, or the washing in of decaying vegetable or organic matter. The following mode of building a well has many advantages over the ordinary way. Excavate down to the water level, then arch the well over with stones and place the suction pipe into the well. Next, refill with loose stones. On top of these, place coarse gravel, sand, and finally, clean earth. Carry the pipe above ground to the suction pump. A thus built well is very safe against introduction of foreign matter. The best wells are probably what are called driven wells or Abyssinian wells. They are constructed as follows. A wrought iron tube, 1½ to 2 inches diameter, having at its end a steel point perforated with numerous holes, is driven into the ground, which must of course be free from stones or boulders until the groundwater is reached. If necessary, several lengths of tubing are screwed together by means of couplings. The upper end of the tube is attached to the pump, and continued suction will soon wash away the sand at the lower end of the pipe and furnish a stream of clear water. Wherever a well cannot be sunk, cottages should be supplied with rainwater collected from the roof and stored either in tanks placed in the garret or else in underground cisterns. The latter keep the temperature of the water moderately low throughout the year. Most people, unaccustomed to drink rainwater, object to it on account of its flat taste, but if it is carefully collected, properly stored, boiled before use, filtered, cooled with ice, and well aerated, it makes an exceedingly wholesome and agreeable drink. To determine the amount of rainwater available from a certain roof, ascertain the amount of surface of its horizontal projection, and multiply this by the annual rainfall in feet and decimals of a foot. The total amount in cubic feet must be divided by 2 to allow for unavoidable loss through evaporation and for wasted impure roof washings. It is easy to arrive at a proper size for the cistern if the available amount of water is known. In collecting roof water, it is important to allow the first washings from the roof, which always contain more or less filth in the shape of dust, horse dung from the street, excrements of birds, leaves from trees, etc., to run off on the surface. This may readily be accomplished by cut-offs on the rainwater pipes, to be worked by hand or arranged to act automatically. The best roofing surface for collecting rainwater is slate, and next to this, shingles. Underground cisterns are usually built circular in shape, of hard burnt brick laid in hydraulic cement. The walls of the cistern must be made perfectly watertight, not only to prevent leakage from it to the outside, but also to prevent the entrance into it of groundwater. If an overflow pipe is provided, it should under no circumstances whatever communicate with any drain or sewer or discharge into a cesspool. As soon as delivered into the cistern, the water must be kept scrupulously clean, and any possible source of pollution should be removed. It is a good plan to build into the cistern a filtering chamber to remove the coarser impurities in the water. Cisterns should be frequently inspected, emptied, and cleaned. The opening at the top must be closed by a solid cover to prevent the falling in of vermin, mice, rats, etc., and to guard against contamination by surface washings. Occasionally, a dwelling house is supplied from a distant spring by a gravitation supply in case the spring is near a hilltop, or by means of a hydraulic ram if the spring is situated at a lower level than the house. If the dwelling draws its supply from a well or cistern, the water is usually lifted by means of suction pumps, generally located for convenience's sake inside the house at the kitchen sink. If the cottage has any plumbing fixtures on the upper floor, it becomes necessary to force water by a lift and force pump to a small reservoir or tank under the roof, from which it is distributed to the fixtures under a constant head of pressure. Such water tanks should be made of cast iron, well painted, or of wrought iron, well protected against rust. Slate tanks are also very good. Cheaper than either of these are wooden tanks. Wooden tanks are often lined with tinned copper. Lead, zinc, or galvanized iron linings are undesirable. Care must be taken not to run the overflow of a tank into any soil or drain pipe. The simplest way of disposing of it is to run it into the gutter of the roof. If this is not feasible, run it down to the kitchen sink and make it serve as a telltale for use with the force pump at the kitchen sink. And with those incredibly detailed sanitary instructions, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Cottages, or Hints on Economical Building. If you're at all inclined, I do recommend you check out the ebook version of this and take a look at the plate designs of the houses. Some of them are really quite nice. As always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.